Welcome back to Success is Weird and Messy. I am your host, Kathleen Gabriel. Each week I talk with entrepreneurs and how they've managed all the challenges and changes that come with running a business. Today I'm joined by AmyK Hutchens. AmyK is an international award-winning speaker, the Amazon #1 bestselling author of the books Get It, The 5 Steps to Sex, Salary, and the Success You Want, and The Secrets Leaders Keep, and is the founder of the global community for leaders, ignitebrilliance.com. She has worked with companies including Whole Foods, Lockheed Martin, Expedia, and hundreds more. And I am so excited for this conversation. AmyK, welcome.
It feels like a total privilege.
This is going to be so great. I'm so happy to have you here. So I gave, the overview introduction. I would love to hear more about you, your business, what you do.
At the end of the day, I am a teacher. And I've been teaching since I started elementary school teaching. That was my very first job. But now I get to teach adults, and I teach them from stage as a professional speaker. And I also get the joy, what's lighting me up right now, are all the retreats that I am leading. Either corporate retreats or women's retreats or VIP one-on-one retreats, but I love it. While everybody else is racing off to the world and doing, AI, I'm like, let's go back and do fire ceremony.
Yes, totally. What are those retreats like? What do people learn? What do you teach?
So I'm still leadership and communication. I've always been that. And this is about the conversations within. So everything from intuition to preparing for the tough conversations, drawing boundaries, self-awareness, finding your truth, speaking your truth, finding that courage to be brave in the world. And then I'm really big on tuning into your heart. So a lot of what we do is shifting leaders from an ego-led, an ego-driven life to a heart-lit one. And what most type A overachievers don't realize is that the ego isn't just that insecure, arrogant voice out in the world, that big expression. It's the one that keeps you small. It's the one that fills you with doubt and shame and guilt and self-recrimination. And so we got to work on the ego on that so that you can move out of that. And again, to play bigger, to shine brighter. And that probably sounds a little woo-woo, except that I take it very seriously as a science girl. It's like, yeah, this is what we're going to do.
Well, and honestly, I was having so many conversations recently about power and how power shows up in our lives and in the workplace and everywhere, and how that grappling for power really creates opposite results. If what you're after is power and control, you really start squeezing out the things that might be your actual other goals associated with that.
Yeah, and you create unintended consequences. I mean, that's the classic power over and bullying and domination and leading by insecurity and then making situations worse or making poor decisions, all because they're ego-driven. And so sometimes, we have a very narrow definition of ego in the world. It's like, it's like false bravado and arrogance and insecurity. And it's like, it goes so much deeper than that. The shadow wounds, that hurt locker that everybody has. And so to me, it's the idea of not really false bravado, not the faking it till you make it, which I think is actually more destructive than we realize. It is that ability to show up and say, this is who I am, and I'm constantly evolving, and I'm growing, and I misstep, and I'm human, and ironically, I'm messy. And when I can own all of that, then I get to lead with greater authenticity.
So that is something that I always find fascinating because, I work in HR, and so I'm working with people all the time. And there always is a conversation of how much of your real self can you really bring to work? Because, people have this idea of it is work. I need to put on my work clothes and my work face and my work attitude. And that's not necessarily my self. And if I bring my actual self to work, I'll get punished for that. So how do you bridge that gap when talking to people who have that sort of perspective?
Well, I think it starts with self-awareness. So the first thing is, let's just do as a classic example. I'm not in a great mood today. If I go in all cranky and irritable, there is going to be a ripple effect. So it's not about denying the fact that you're irritated. It's about owning it and taking that minute. Maybe it's even that sacred pause before you get out of your car and walk through the door of your office. Or if you're working remotely, it's the, hey, before I flip on the Zoom, let me take a few minutes to say, I am irritated. Where is this coming from? What's the thought behind it? What's causing this feeling? All right, that's more just, again, knowledge for me to have. And I'm going to set that aside. I am going to put on my work face. Now that I understand where I'm coming from and what's bothering me, I'm going to show up as my best self, my professional self. And then when this call is over, if I have an opportunity, I'm going to resume the work. And if I don't have an opportunity to resume the work, then I'll wait until the end of the day. So there is a double standard of I need to be my best self. Now, here's another way to play it. Suppose it's just a couple of your colleagues and it's not client facing, where you need to be your best self. If it's with colleagues, you might say, Kathleen, if I have like a less than like positive attitude on my face, it's because I'm distracted by some other things. I'm here, I'm working through it, but I just want you to know that it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. That's an honest way to connect with you and say, I have some stuff going on. I'm not my best self today, but I'm committed to showing up and doing the best that I can, knowing that I'm a little distracted. And I think there's a level of honesty and vulnerability that your colleagues will appreciate. Now, if you're doing that all the time and you're creating drama, different conversation. But if I show up with you and I am normally a high performer and I care and I'm conscientious and my emotional intelligence is high and my work ethic is strong, I'm going to look at you and I'm going to say, I'm not having the best day and I'm still trying to like work through it. But I just want you to know that if I've got like a resting bitch face today, it's not about you. It's not about you. And there's some grace in that because then you can be like, okay, thank you for sharing.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like really, especially if you're coming from a leadership perspective, if you show up as a leader with this amount of trust and vulnerability, you almost can't help but build trust in the rest of your group because that's how you're leading. That's where you're showing up from.
And I think there's a big caveat here in terms of you are not leading from your wounds. You are leading from your scars. And that is a big difference. So you're not so raw that you're emoting and you're reacting and you're inappropriate. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that I've done the work. And by the work, I mean that internal work. And I know how to appropriately engage with an interpersonal level of communication that says, most of the time I show up and I am good and I'm in it and I'm here and I'm present and I'm committed and you have my undivided attention. Today's not that day.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very important distinction to make because I think especially with people who aren't necessarily practiced in doing this, they might think, okay, you want me to be my whole self. Well, here's everything.
So I had this is a kind of a funny story you reminded me of. Years ago, a gentleman called me. It's like, can you help me role play some interview processing because I'm not getting hired? And I was like, well, tell me just about your last 3 interviews. And he proceeded to describe all the stuff that he shared about his life that was going on. And it was all a little much. It was all just a little too in the wound and not the scar. And I was like, I wouldn't hire you right now. Not because you're not an amazing human being, not because I don't have compassion. I said, but my first thought is, I don't know that you have the bandwidth to take on a new role when you have all this other personal stuff going on. And I said, it doesn't mean you couldn't. I said, but you led with your wounds, not your scars. And he was like, oh, okay, so I'm sharing too much. I was like, and that's another way to say it.
Yeah. And I will say also, having been on the interviewer side of that chair, sometimes in those situations, it makes me wonder, well, will this person really know what's appropriate and what's not? Does this person have good boundaries, good healthy boundaries in place to be in a workplace? Because, boundaries are important. They are part of being your best self. So how did you get into this line of work?
The hard way, doing everything that we just said, wrong. I started off as an elementary school teacher and I became a corporate trainer. And then I became an entrepreneur who led a training company. And I joke irreverently, Kathleen, that the reason that I teach communication skills is because where your greatest pain resides is also your greatest gift. And I am the classic don't know what to say the wrong thing. Think of what the perfect words would have been 6 hours later. Think about how I could have crafted that conversation better, Monday morning quarterbacking hindsight. And so I'm sharing all that I've learned so that people can get more confident and more articulate and have better relationship dynamics and be less critical of themselves, be faster at self-forgiveness, to ask for what they need, to hold their own, and not take quite as long as I did in figuring it all out.
Well, I have to say, knowing you now, I never would have guessed that would have been an obstacle for you. How did you learn all the skills that you have now?
The hard way. I mean, that's the irony is that I had people say egregious things to me in the workplace. And I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to hold my own. I didn't know how to respond thoughtfully. So sometimes I would turn bright red, my throat would constrict, and then I understood the mind body connection, the physiology of anxiety and how it, contracts blood vessels and causes your eyes to get teary. I would say something harsh because it would just blurt out. And then I would realize, oh, now I'm the asshat. And so then you'd have to apologize and backpedal, and you've already done the damage, right? And it's not to say that we aren't human. I still misstep. I still put my foot in my mouth. But now I'm faster at either course correcting or taking that sacred pause so that it happens less often, preparing more intentionally for a tough conversation. I always say that, the life we want is on the other side of a tough conversation. And some of those tough conversations are with ourselves. And so that to me is being in the practice, is showing up, realizing we are messy, quirky, misstepping, mistaking human beings, and then learning how to either put guardrails or course correcting a little faster.
I really appreciate that, because I will also say, just over the course of my life, and everyone goes through whatever their growth and learning is, but just looking back at my younger self who was doing her best and was put in stressful situations and leadership positions that I wasn't ready for yet, and trying to do things from that place of insecurity. And a lot of my initial reaction was that sort of grasping for power and authority, and that in the heart of that fear of, well, I hope people don't find out that I don't know what I'm doing, instead of just stepping up and saying, hey, this is my first time doing this. Let's learn together. It's going to be fine. That would have been so much more effective.
Especially for overachievers. It's so hard to go back and forgive yourself and give yourself that grace. And yet the good news is when you start talking to women, especially, will be like, who I was in my 20s, I was not in my 30s. And who I was in my 30s is not who I am in my 40s. And who I am in my 50s is not who I was. I mean, it just goes on and on. And I think that there are people, we get a lot of mixed messages, but there are people out there who will tell you, look, we all make mistakes. We got to give ourselves grace. We got to give ourselves a second chance. We have to forgive ourselves. And it is very possible that the mistake that you made on somebody else's path, their choice is not to give you grace. Their choice is not to forgive you. Maybe there was an egregious misstep. And you still have to tell yourself you are better because of it now. You have learned something. You would never either do that or say that or act that way or take that decision again. You've evolved. And that can be really hard for go-getter women to do, is to give themselves the self-forgiveness that allows them to continue to evolve.
Yeah, because honestly, even when we do unforgivable things, we do have to move on and keep going. And hopefully we move on with greater understanding that we will never do something like that again, rather than locking it away so that it might. So when you went off on your own and started this business, what did it look like at the very beginning when you first started versus what it looks like now?
When I first started, I left a corporate position as a sales trainer and was running sales in a certain part of the world for $1 billion consumer product company. And so I was very much in this world of sales, sales, sales. So when I became an entrepreneur, I was like, well, I'll just naturally do sales training. And over time, it morphed into consulting, to talking to leaders, to working with leaders and being so excited and intrigued by strategy and finances and culture and people development that I became a leadership consultant and trainer. And it just kept morphing, and I kept learning and growing. And I say, somebody will say, what's your favorite book? And I'm like, well, do you have 50 hours? Because I'm a voracious reader. And now today it is leadership and communication. And it started off as sales and communication. And now it's really gone into that self-awareness, self-development. I mentioned earlier before we started that this whole technological advancement is super important. We use AI in our company too. And yet it seems like the more the world races ahead with all these advancements, the more I want to go back to ancient fire ceremony. It's like, but we still need to connect, real connect. So I get lit up by that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in every era of the world, especially when you're in a technological advancement period, and we're in a hyper advancement period right now, and we kind of have been for the last 100 years, there is that grasping for, but who are we as people? And yeah, we're integrating AI, etc. All kinds of technology into our lives right now. Just this morning, I was watching a demonstration of how to turn a still picture into an interactive video. And it was wild how human it seemed. Like, kind of. Again, not entirely, but if I was just walking by that, I wouldn't have thought twice. And so we're in this era now. And so the real question is, though, but we're still people. How do you still connect with our humanity, like your own and other people's, and training other people to stay connected in that, like you say, that fire ceremony sort of way? How do you make that happen?
For me, it's through the conversation and the connection, the generative listening. So we run retreats. We do a lot of retreats. And it is a little bit of the, hey, no matter what you're doing, whether you're building a bridge or you're putting out a beauty product or you're running banking or you're an architectural firm, at the end of the day, you're in the people business. The people that you employ, the people that you serve, and we all still have our human dreams and desires, and we're all still growing and evolving. So coming back to that in a very curated way. So it's a very thoughtful, consciously produced experience to listen, to tune in. I mean, most of the leaders that we work with are hyperachievers who are go, 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 90 miles an hour. And I'll say, okay, what does your heart say? And they're like, AmyK, I don't have time for that nonsense. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to ask you again. What does your heart say? And they're like, I can't hear my heart. I'm like, well, then that's where we start.
And with people who can't hear their hearts, how do they find you? Because you would think that people who were hearing their hearts already would be actively seeking you out.
It's interesting. We have both. So you have the person that's like, oh, I really want to do this. And then somebody will hear me speak because I'll be on stage talking about leadership. I'll be on a podcast and somebody will say, you said something that I can't stop thinking about. And that's where their heart starts to be heard above all the noise, the din, the busyness, the society telling them who they think they should be. And by the way, it's men and women. So I had a gentleman the other day, he reached out and he said, I just got promoted and I feel horrible and I have no idea why. And I heard a podcast that you were on and you said something about your state of being is your number one doing. And he's like, and my state of being is gross. And I was like, bring it. Because there's something where you've reached the edge. You've gone now to like that edge of, I can't do this anymore. And now you're filled with fear to take a step in that same direction, fear to stop moving in that same direction, fear of blowing up your life, but something is bubbling up. And so to do it in a healthy and constructive way, he knew it. And I think you're in HR, really bright people are often afraid to ask for help. They see it as a sign of weakness. And we all know that asking for help is one of the biggest signs of strength that you can do as a leader. And sometimes it's hard.
Yeah. And I think it's doubly hard when you don't even know what you need help with. Like this guy that you just mentioned, he didn't have a defined idea of, we need to fix this thing because this is the problem. He just had the amorphous view of, this isn't right and I don't know why. And I think it's very difficult, even more so, to ask for help when you're reaching out to say, I need help with something that I haven't even figured out yet. So absolutely.
A lot of times we'll look at external solutions. So for instance, I appreciate organization in my life. I absolutely do. But there's a time when you're like, well, I just need to get more control over my time. And like, I'm going to color code my inbox. And it's like, okay, I'm not saying that any of those things are bad, but what's going on is deeper than your just lack of time management. I mean, there's like, so for instance, I give a classic example of years ago, I had a gentleman, he was late to everything. And people are like, oh, he just has a problem with time and it's just his personality and he's just a little rude, but that's just who he is. And I started coaching with him. I'm like, he's late to everything because he's unhappy. Like his subconscious at a deep, deep level was like, I don't want to be doing any of this stuff. I don't want to be there. And so it's just a way of uncovering all those layers to say, what's going on underneath?
Mm-hmm. And also, like, especially for people who are late, are they late to everything? Or are they late to some kind of things?
Exactly. Kathleen, you nailed it. It's like, oh, let's talk about when you're not late.
Are you always on time to the party, but never on time to the finance meeting? Absolutely. Really looking at what is actually happening here makes a huge difference. So I was looking through your website and I saw on your blog from May that you were talking all about sparking engagement. And that's something that, of course, I'm always interested in. I feel like that's something that people struggle with in different ways, whether that's at work or at home. And how do you think people should approach increasing engagement? Because I think that's something that we're all looking for in every context.
I think it starts with the not super profound, but the classic practical of inclusivity and saying that your voice matters. So it's a question-driven agenda at a meeting where people are contributing their thoughts and ideas. And it doesn't mean you're going to use all of them, but just by saying, how might we? That classic phrase that started for me at William and Mary when we did a gifted and talented curriculum implementation. It went on to be a big thing at Harvard and universities around the world. That ideation idea, the design labs of how might we filled with possibility, to just the idea of asking more open-ended questions and appreciative inquiry. And then listening and taking the time to listen. So whether it's the Harville Hendrix of empathic listening or the super communicator loop of understanding, it's the idea of I am present. I am not interested in my own personal agenda. I'm interested in what you have to say. So most conversations are like you, me, you, me, you, me. And the idea of inclusivity and engagement is you. Okay, say more about that you. Okay, tell me a little bit more about that you. Give me another example, you. And only then do you say, oh, well, now from my experience, I want to share. But you're giving that person a chance to escalate and really show them that you are listening and you are actively engaged in what they have to say. I don't know about you, but we're often victims of the conversation where you'll ask somebody how they are and they'll be like, oh, well, I went to the dentist today. And I'm like, oh my God, I went to the dentist last year and I had like 5 months. And it's just like, okay, just pause. It's not about you. You ask them a question. Stay focused on them for a second.
Yeah. And I think especially folks like, I don't know, I have my own neurodiversities. I was diagnosed with inattentive ADHD, so I have my own sort of coping mechanisms with that. I find with a lot of my autistic friends, people with other sorts of neurospiciness, they really get into the practice of, wait, I was giving an example for that connection. And what I'm seeing is with some people that works. With people who have that same sort of spiciness, maybe that works of, well, you went to the dentist, I went to the dentist. We have a sameness. Whereas if you take that a step too far and you're not alert to it, then it's, yes, I've derailed the conversation and now it's about me. And it's not about it making a connection. It's about, I don't know, saying more words, maybe?
Just turning it back to them. So let's just take that, again, it's a prosaic example, but it's something we can all relate to. You tell me you went to the dentist. I can say, oh my gosh, I went to the dentist this morning too. What was your experience? So I can connect with you and then give you back the talking stick.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the major thing that everyone, I know very few people who aren't in constant practice of like, hey, how do I do this better if they're alert to it, is, yeah, how do I hand that back over? Because it should be mutual. It should be about, both people or however many people in the conversation, but who is the focus of the moment? And do people get to have their say and have their, I don't know, showing themselves to other people and being seen?
Little trick to upping the engagement as well is to, as a facilitator or a leader of a meeting, especially at work, just for an example, is to call on people who are quieter, to take that role of facilitator seriously. So if I've been hearing from Kathleen and AmyK has shared her experience, then I might turn and say, hey, Roddy, tell me what's going on, with you, or have you been to the dentist in the last 18 months? I mean, it's the idea of, again, you taking responsibility to make sure that everybody at that table has a voice. Now, I'm not encouraging that somebody speaks just to speak and hear the sound of their voice. So it's also encouraging, maybe I call on Joanne and Joanne says, actually, I have nothing to add, but at least we gave her the opportunity. Or I might pull a thread just a little bit more and say, now, Joanne, you did a fabulous job on that project 6 months ago. How does this one relate? Like, what do you think we should replicate? And that's my job to ask her a very specific and pointed question to get her to engage. And I think that is something that is a skill that we can all learn, is to say it's my job as the leader of a meeting, or it's my job as the leader of a department to make sure that I give people opportunities to use their voice.
And one thing that really resonated with me when you said that was that specificity. Because if you walk into a room and say, "How is everyone today?" the reflex is to say, "Fine," or something similar. Whereas if you come in with a specific question, "Hey, we all reached a milestone or something. Tell me about a specific part of that experience. Tell me about what this was." We actually want information and response and even feelings and even thoughts or things that aren't necessarily locked down. We want to have a conversation. I think facilitating that conversation is much more intentional than sometimes we go into.
And I think that goes back to one of the most important things that we tell, whether you're leading at home or you're leading at work, we tell leaders it's the intention that you set. It's the prep work, especially for a critical one that has more gravitas to it. We'll say you've got to sit down and prepare. What does this either meeting, conversation sound like, look like? What's your intention? What are you going to ask? What are you hoping is an outcome? What are your either offers? What are you going to be willing to do coming out of it? What are you going to request somebody else to do? But to do a little bit of that prep work planning prior to the conversation can put guardrails around it. It sets everybody up for success. And it's just the idea of a little bit of prep work makes for a highly profitable conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Well, we've reached the moment in the podcast where I'm going to ask you what I ask everyone, which is, AmyK, how do you define success?
At 53, I define it very differently than I did a long time ago. For me, success is that you show up as your most authentic self as often as you can. And that goes back full circle to where we started. Authenticity doesn't mean that you have to fake it till you make it. It also doesn't mean that you have to share too much. It just means that I am who I am, and I am not morphing to please you, to please the voice, to please the noise outside of me. The more I show up comfortable in my own skin, the more success I'll experience.
That's incredible. I love it. So thank you again, AmyK. Thank you again for joining me today. Where can people find you online?
AmyK.com, AmYK.com. Super easy.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I'm going to have your links in the show notes. So everyone, thank you for listening. You can find Success is Weird and Messy wherever you get your podcasts. And it helps us so much if you follow, rate, and review. And if you like the show, tell a friend. We'll see you next week.